Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are settling in for a conversation that I think is really going to resonate with a lot of you listening.
I completely agree. It touches on something very fundamental.
Yeah, it's a topic that it touches on a tension I think so many of us have felt over the years, even if we haven't quite known how to put it into words.
Right, that vague sense that something might be missing.
Exactly. So today we are looking at a piece of writing by Brother Woody Brom. It's titled, Leaving the Building, a Biblical Case for House Churches in Place of the Institutional Model.
It is a phenomenal essay, very thorough.
It is. But I have to admit, looking at that title, my initial reaction was a mix of intrigue and, honestly, a little bit of defensiveness.
Which is a completely normal reaction, by the way.
I mean, I grew up in church buildings. I have so many memories there.
Yeah.
The youth group rooms, the sanctuary. So when someone says leave the building, it feels like a really big ask.
It is a massive ask. And it's good to be here to walk through this with you today because that reaction you're describing, that defensiveness or that sense of nostalgia, it's very real.
Yeah. It's deeply ingrained in us.
Yes. But Brother Broom actually anticipates that. He isn't writing this essay to tear down people's memories or to just be an iconoclast for the sake of it.
Right. He's not just trying to be provocative.
Not at all. He writes as a pastor who is deeply concerned about the resilience of the faith for everyday believers.
And just to set the stage for you listening, and honestly for myself too, I think a lot of believers struggle with the difference between going to church as an event on the calendar versus being the church as a people.
That is the core tension right there.
You know, the routine, right? You wake up, you get the kids dressed up, you drive to the building, you sit in the pew, you listen to a message, and you leave.
And you tick the box for the week.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes there's this nagging question. Is this it? Is this the full picture of what Jesus intended for his people?
That is the heart of the matter. And frankly, it's the exact question that drives this entire essay. Brum frames this not as an attack on the modern church, but as a recovery.
A recovery, I like that.
Yes. He is asking us to look at the modern model, the building-centered, staff-heavy, program-driven institution, and ask a really hard question.
Which is whether this is actually required by the Bible.
Exactly. Is it required, or does the New Testament offer us a different pattern? One that might be much simpler, but perhaps far more resilient in the face of a rapidly changing world.
I do like that word recovery. It sounds a lot less destructive than just tearing things down.
It implies that something valuable has been lost and needs to be found again.
Right. But let's get into the weeds here.
Yeah.
Because if we are going to recover something, we have to know what it is we're actually talking about.
We have to define our terms.
Yeah, and Brum starts right at the beginning with the definition of the word church itself. Yeah. And I think for most of us, if we're honest, church is a noun that means a building with a pointy roof.
Or a big warehouse with a cool logo nowadays.
Right. It's a destination. You put it into your GPS, navigating to church.
Exactly. And Brum argues that this mental image isn't just a harmless cultural habit. He says it's actually a linguistic drift that deeply obscures the Bible.
How so?
Well, to understand this, we have to look at the Greek word used in the New Testament. The word is ecclesia.
Ecclesia. Yeah, we hear that in seminary or deep dive Bible studies sometimes.
We do hear it, but we often miss the cultural baggage, or rather the lack of religious baggage that the word carried in the first century.
What do you mean by that?
This is one of those moments where knowing just a little bit of Greek history really changes the color of the text. You see, in the first century, ecclesia wasn't a religious word at all.
It wasn't.
No, it wasn't something you'd only hear from a priest or in a temple. It was a completely secular civic term.
So it was political.
Essentially, yes. In a Greek city-state, the ecclesia was the assembly of citizens called out to conduct the business of the city.
Like a town hall meeting.
Precisely. It was the town hall. It was the decision-making body of the people. So when Jesus stands up in Matthew 16 and says, I will build my ecclesia.
He isn't saying I'm going to start a new religion with shrines and temples.
No, he isn't. He's saying, I am assembling a congress. I am assembling a living body of citizens for my kingdom.
Wow. That totally reframes the concept of going to church. I mean, you can't go to a congress if you are the congress.
That is the exact point Brum is making. You can assemble with them, but the building is irrelevant to the identity of the group.
Right.
Whether the congress meets in a marble hall or a grassy field, they are still the congress. The people are the entity.
That makes so much sense.
And Brum makes the historical point that for the first 300 years of Christian history, which is a very long time if you think about it.
Yeah, think about the distance between us today and the founding of the United States.
Exactly. For that entire duration, they had no dedicated church buildings. None.
No steeples, no foyers, no massive parking lots.
Nothing like that. And yet that was arguably the most explosive period of growth in all of church history.
They basically turned the Roman Empire upside down without owning a single piece of real estate.
It forces a really uncomfortable question for us today.
Which is?
If they conquered the Roman Empire without buildings, and we today are struggling just to keep the lights on with our buildings.
Are the buildings actually helping?
Exactly. Or have they become a massive distraction from the actual mission?
Man, that is a heavy question.
It requires some serious reflection.
It really does. But before we get to the how of the early church, I want to back up a little bit, because Brum points out that this idea of home-based faith didn't just appear out of nowhere in the book of Acts.
No, it has deep roots.
Right? He traces it all the way back to the Old Testament, which really surprised me, honestly.
Why did that surprise you?
Because when I think Old Testament, I immediately think temple. I think massive stone structures, gold, overlays the incense, the priests, the whole production.
Sure, and that is the public face of Israel's worship, certainly. You can't ignore the tabernacle and the temple.
Right.
But Rome directs our attention to Deuteronomy chapter 6, which is really the absolute heartbeat of Jewish discipleship.
This is Si Shema, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord, our God, the Lord is one.
Yes, the central confession of the faith. But look closely at the context of how that faith was actually commanded to be transmitted.
Okay.
The command wasn't take your children to the priest once a week for a youth program.
Right.
The command was teach these words to your children when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up.
So it's rhythmic. It's embedded in the mundane, everyday stuff.
Exactly. It's integrated into the daily rhythm of life. It isn't siloed off into a specialized religious service on a specific day.
The home was the primary vessel for passing down the knowledge of God to the next generation.
If the faith wasn't alive at the dinner table, it really didn't matter what was happening up at the temple. The home was the front line.
Brum also mentions the Passover in Exodus 12. That really stood out to me as I was reading through the essay.
It's a profound connection.
Because the biggest event in their history, the night of redemption from Egypt, wasn't a massive public convocation.
No, it wasn't at all. Think about the logistics of that night. The angel of death is passing over Egypt. Where is the safety found?
It isn't found in a cathedral or a temple.
It is found in households. The text says the whole community of Israel, that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household.
The blood was painted on the doorframe of the individual home.
Yes. The father acted as the priest for his family in that moment. The sacred meal was eaten right there in the living room, effectively.
So the home has always been the site of redemption.
That is the theological argument here. Brahm points out that while public worship at the tabernacle or the temple certainly mattered for the national feasts, the home always remained the primary school for the knowledge of God.
He brings up Psalm 78 as well, right?
Yes. Speaking to this exact dynamic, handing down the truth from fathers to children in the context of family life.
So by the time we get to the New Testament, the idea of faith being centered in the home wasn't some revolutionary new concept.
Not at all. It was a return to the root. It was the fulfillment of what God had instituted from the very beginning.
Okay, so let's fast forward to the book of Acts. The Holy Spirit falls at Pentecost. 3,000 people get saved in a single day.
A miraculous day.
But logistically, that is a nightmare. I mean, if 3,000 people join my local church this coming Sunday, we'd have a collective panic attack.
You would immediately need a building program.
We'd need a stadium. We'd be calling architects on Monday morning.
But this is where the providence of God is just so clear in the text. Brome argues that God had already prepared the infrastructure long before he poured out the Spirit.
The infrastructure was the home.
Exactly. They didn't have to launch a capital campaign. They didn't have to wait 3 years for city permits and construction delays.
The sanctuaries were already built.
They were the living rooms and courtyards of the believers. They were ready to go from day one.
Now, the text does mention a dual approach, though.
Right. Yes, it does.
Because Acts 2:46 says they met every day in the temple courts and broke bread in their homes. So it wasn't just homes.
Correct. And it's very important not to miss that nuance. The early church was highly public. They met in the temple courts, specifically Solomon's colonnade, which was this massive open-air public space.
So that's where they did the evangelism.
Yes, that's where the apostles proclaimed the resurrection to the entire city. It was the public square.
But notice where the actual intimacy happens.
Exactly. The text says they broke bread in their homes, and the underlying Greek there indicates from house to house.
So the church service, as we typically think of it today, the fellowship, the meal, the deep interpersonal connection, that was the private side. And the
Yes.
public side was more like street preaching or public evangelism.
In a sense, yes. The public gathering was for proclamation to the masses. But the life of the body, the koinonia, the true fellowship, happened around a dinner table.
And this dual approach of public proclamation and private discipleship is seen throughout Acts.
It's a consistent pattern. Acts 5:42 and Acts 20, verse 20.
Where Paul says, I have not hesitated to preach anything that would be helpful to you, but have taught you publicly and from house to house.
So it's not a strict either-or scenario, but the home is the constant foundational element.
The home is the constant. And the epistles really prove this out.
They do. Just do a simple word search for the word church in the letters of Paul. It's eye-opening.
Romans 16, verse 5, greet also the church that meets at their house.
1 Corinthians 16:19, Colossians 4:15, Philemon 1:2, it's everywhere.
The church that meets at their house. That phrasing implies that this was just the normal shape of things.
It wasn't an exception.
Right, it wasn't like, oh, the synagogue is under renovation, so we're just going to meet at Priscilla's place for a few weeks until the carpet is installed.
No, this was plan A. This was the design of the early church.
And Brum points out that this design had massive strategic advantages.
Huge advantages. We already talked about the logistics of absorbing 3,000 people, but think about survival.
Think about persecution.
Exactly. The early believers were often unwelcome in their cities, and sometimes they were actively hunted.
Right. And if you have a big prominent building, you have a massive target on your back.
Precisely. If the church had depended on large, highly visible temples, the Romans or the local religious leaders could have just shut the doors, arrested the staff, and crushed the movement in a week.
But you can't easily crush a movement that lives in 1,000 different living rooms.
It's structurally impossible to wipe out.
It's like a starfish. You cut off a leg and it just grows back. It's a totally decentralized network.
That is a great analogy. It is a distributed network. Look at Acts chapter 8. It describes the believers being severely scattered by persecution in Jerusalem.
And what happened?
The text says those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went, because they literally carried the church with them.
They didn't leave the church back in Jerusalem because the church wasn't a building they had to leave behind.
The church was the people. So wherever the people went, the church went.
I want to pivot here to the money aspect.
Mhm.
Because Brom drops a point in this section that I think hits really hard, especially in our current economic climate.
Yes, he talks about economic stewardship.
This is the follow the money moment of the entire essay.
It really is. In the modern Western model of church, if you look at a typical annual budget, usually 50 to 60% of the entire budget goes to just two things.
Let me guess. The mortgage or the rent and the staff required to run the facility.
You hit the nail on the head.
I mean, that sounds about right from what I've seen. You've got heating, cooling, liability insurance, the sound system, the landscaping, repaving the parking lot every few years. It adds up so fast.
It becomes an institutional gravity well.
The gravity well.
Yes, it just sucks all the resources inward. You end up spending the vast majority of your tithes and offerings just to maintain the container that you meet in for maybe 2 or 3 hours a week.
That's a sobering way to put it. Maintaining the container.
Brum contrasts this modern reality with the picture we get in Acts chapter 4.
Where it says there were no needy persons among them.
Right. Now think about the math of that statement. Why were there literally no needy persons in that community?
Because they were generous.
Well, yes, they were generous, but practically speaking, it was because they didn't have the massive burden of funding real estate.
Oh, wow.
If you suddenly wiped out the mortgage, the insurance, and the utility bills from your current church budget, you have just freed up hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of dollars annually.
And where does all that money go in the early church model?
In Acts, it went directly to the poor. It went to the widows. It went to traveling missionaries.
It went to people.
Yes. It shifted the financial focus from maintenance to mission.
That is profound.
Brom argues that without the crushing overhead of maintaining buildings, the early church was incredibly agile. They could support traveling workers, feed the hungry, and care for their own in a way that is almost impossible for us today.
Because we are essentially house poor as congregations.
We are institutionally house poor.
That really changes the definition of giving to the church. I mean, currently, when I write a check or set up my online giving, I know in the back of my mind that a lot of that is effectively paying the electric bill.
Or paying for the lawn care.
Right. But in the house church model, my check is literally buying food for a family in the church that just lost their job.
It creates a completely different kind of reliance and community bond. And as Brome points out, it makes the church anti-fragile.
Anti-fragile meaning it thrives under stress.
Exactly. If the economy collapses, the house church is totally fine.
They don't have a massive mortgage to default on.
Right. Their sanctuary is a living room that is already paid for or rented by the family living in it. The church doesn't go bankrupt because the church doesn't own anything that can be foreclosed on.
That is a very compelling argument for resilience, especially today.
It is deeply practical.
But I want to get into the actual what do you do part of this. Because I think people listening might be thinking, okay, cool, we save money, we meet in a home. But is it just a hangout? Is it just drinking coffee and chatting about our week?
That is the danger, isn't it?
Yeah.
That it just devolves into a social club with no spiritual weight.
Exactly.
But Acts 2:42 gives us the 4 specific pillars of the early church gathering, and Brome insists that these must be present for it to actually be a church.
Let's read that. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer.
Let's break those 4 down, because I think we assume we know what they mean, but the living room context changes them completely.
Okay, let's take teaching first. We usually assume teaching requires a pulpit, a microphone, and a monologue.
A professional talking to a room full of amateurs.
Right.
But teaching in a home changes the dynamic entirely. It moves naturally from a monologue to a dialogue.
Because you're sitting on a sofa.
Exactly. In a living room, you are maybe 5 feet away from the person teaching. It naturally allows for questions and clarifications.
It allows for what we see in Acts 20 when Paul is in Troas.
Yes, where he speaks until midnight. But remember, the setting is an upper room in a house. It's intimate.
It's interactive discipleship. You can stop the teacher and say, wait, I don't get that verse.
Yeah.
Can you explain what Paul meant there?
Yes.
You can't really do that during a Sunday morning sermon without getting escorted out by the ushers.
You certainly cannot, but that interactivity is what ensures that people are actually learning and not just passively listening.
Okay, then you have the second pillar, fellowship. The Greek word there is koinonia.
Which means shared life participation, deep partnership.
So it's much deeper than just the coffee hour in the church lobby.
Infinitely deeper. It implies a tangible sharing of resources and a sharing of life's burdens.
It's the one another commands of the New Testament actually coming to life.
Exactly. You can't bear one another's burdens if you have no idea what those burdens actually are.
That's so true.
In a crowd of 500 people, you can hide. You can smile, shake a few hands, and go home without anyone knowing that your marriage is falling apart or that you're struggling with addiction.
But in a living room of 12 people,
there is nowhere to hide. You are fully known.
That's honestly a little scary.
It is very vulnerable, but it is also the only place where true spiritual healing can happen.
Okay, the third pillar, breaking of bread. This is a big one.
It's massive.
Because in most traditional churches, this is a tiny cracker and a little plastic cup of juice passed down a row in total silence.
It's treated very somberly, very individualistically. Just me and Jesus closing my eyes.
But in the New Testament, it was an actual meal, right?
It was a full supper. The Lord's Supper was an actual supper that the church ate together.
Grum points to 1 Corinthians 11 for this.
Yes, where Paul is severely correcting the church in Corinth. Notice he isn't mad that they are doing a ritual wrong.
He's mad that they are eating selfishly.
Exactly. He rebukes them because the rich members are gorging themselves and getting drunk, while the poor members who maybe arrive late from work go completely hungry.
That context alone implies that the meal was substantial enough to actually get full on.
It was a feast. It was a time of physical sustenance and profound social leveling.
Social leveling.
Yes. The Roman slave and the wealthy master sat at the exact same table and ate the exact same food as equals in Christ.
That would have been scandalous in that culture.
Completely scandalous. And Paul says that partaking correctly requires discerning the body.
Meaning what?
Meaning recognizing the people sitting right next to you as your equal brothers and sisters. You cannot genuinely celebrate the Lord's death while ignoring the physical needs of the Lord's people in the same room.
That changes communion entirely. And finally, the fourth pillar is prayer.
In a large service, usually one professional person prays from the stage while everyone else just listens.
Right.
But in house church, everyone can pray. It becomes a corporate, unified cry to God, not just a performance by a designated leader.
Okay, so we had these 4 pillars: teaching, fellowship, breaking bread, and prayer. But I want to pivot to something that I think is really challenging for our modern mindset,
Let's hear it.
and that is the actual structure of the meeting itself.
Mm,
Brome brings up Paul's vision of a gathering in 1 Corinthians 14:26.
yes, this is really the key text for the house church liturgy, if you want to call it that.
Paul writes, "When you come together, each of you has a hymn or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue or an interpretation."
Right.
Okay, I am going to push back here because I'm reading that, and frankly, it sounds like an absolute nightmare to manage.
It does trigger a lot of anxiety for modern believers, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, each of you. It sounds like an open mic night at a coffee shop.
It can definitely sound that way.
I mean, have you ever been to a wedding reception where they just open the microphone for toasts from anyone in the room?
It's usually a disaster.
It's a total disaster.
Yeah.
You get the drunk uncle, you get the rambling story from a college buddy that never ends,
Yeah.
you get something totally inappropriate.
Right.
If you run a church service that way, aren't you just asking for heresy or utter chaos?
That is the universal fear, and I think it's exactly why, over the centuries, we have swung so hard toward the professional clergy model.
Because it's safer.
It's much safer. We hire a guy, we rigorously vet his theology, we give him the only microphone, and we tell everyone else to sit quietly in the pews so nothing weird happens.
We prioritize quality control over active participation.
Exactly. But Brome argues very strongly that by doing that, we have effectively amputated the body of Christ. We have silenced the biblical doctrine of the priesthood of all believers.
So how do you stop the drunk uncle scenario without completely shutting down the movement of the Spirit? Because surely God is not a God of chaos.
No, he isn't. And Paul is very explicit about that. In that exact same chapter, 1 Corinthians 14, Paul actually sets up very strict ground rules for these gatherings.
What are the rules?
He says, "Let 2 or 3 speak, and let the others weigh what is said."
Let the others weigh what is said. That's a really interesting phrase.
It is the ultimate safety valve for the church. Think about it. In a traditional lecture format, you sit and listen to a sermon, and maybe you disagree with a point in your head, but you don't say anything.
You just swallow it and maybe complain about it in the car on the way home.
Exactly. But in the biblical ecclesia, if someone stands up and says something that sounds off, something that contradicts Scripture, the other elders and the mature believers in the room are explicitly commanded to stop and say, wait a minute, let's weigh that. Let's check that against the Word of God.
So the protection against heresy isn't a wooden pulpit. The protection is the spiritual maturity of the room.
Precisely. But notice what that requires.
Right.
It requires a high-trust, high biblical literacy environment. You absolutely cannot do this if the audience is passive or biblically illiterate.
Because they wouldn't know if someone was saying something wrong.
Exactly. This model forces everyone to actually know their Bible so they can actively discern. It significantly raises the bar for the average believer.
Instead of just consuming religious content, they're personally responsible for guarding the truth.
Yes.
But that begs a huge question. Who is actually in charge? Because if everyone is sharing and anyone can speak, do we just not have leaders anymore?
That's a common misconception about house churches.
I think the fear is that without a reverend or a senior pastor, you just end up with a headless body.
The New Testament text is actually very robust on the topic of leadership, but it emphasizes character over office.
Okay.
If you look at Titus chapter 1 and 1 Timothy chapter 3, Paul lays out the specific qualifications for elders and deacons.
Right.
And if you read those lists carefully, they are almost entirely about spiritual maturity, family life, and moral character.
And we're not about having a seminary degree of full-time salary or a specific title.
Exactly. So, do elders exist in the house church model?
Yes.
Absolutely they do. They are essential to the health of the church. Acts 14:23 says Paul and Barnabas appointed elders in every single church they planted.
What is their primary role then if they aren't just giving a sermon every week?
Their role is to shepherd the flock intimately and to protect the ministry of the word. They are the guardians of sound doctrine and the caretakers of souls.
But they do it from within the circle, not from a stage.
That is the key distinction. They are usually among the flock, not elevated above it.
And what about paying them? Because the essay did touch on the concept of financial support for leaders.
It did. And Brome is balanced here. Galatians 6:6 and 1 Timothy 5 make it abundantly clear that Scripture honors and actively supports those who labor in preaching and teaching.
The worker is worthy of his wages.
Yes. However, the role of an elder doesn't strictly require a full-time salary to be valid.
Right.
In a house church network, you might have leaders who work bivocationally, just like the Apostle Paul making tents in Corinth, or the network of homes might pool their freed-up resources to fully support a traveling worker who serves multiple homes in a region.
It seems like the house church model just requires so much more from the average person. You can't just be a consumer, you have to be a producer.
That is the fundamental shift.
Okay.
And it ties directly into the deeper theology that Brum discusses in the next section.
Let's get into that. He talks about the metaphor of living stones from 1 Peter chapter 2.
Yes. You also, living stones are being built into a spiritual house.
Why is that metaphor so important?
Because it is crucial for understanding the monumental shift from the Old Covenant to the New Covenant.
Okay.
In the Old Testament, the temple was static. It was made of dead things, literal bricks, gold, silver, cedar wood.
And you physically traveled to it.
Yes. But in the New Testament, the temple is dynamic. It is literally made of people. We, the believers, are the living stones.
So when we say, today I'm going to the house of God, and we mean the brick building down the street.
We are actually using Old Testament language that deeply confuses the New Testament reality. We are the house of God. The building is just a weather shell.
And the theology of the priesthood of all believers perfectly supports this.
It does. In the Old Testament, you had a very specific, specialized class of men who could approach God on behalf of the people.
The Levites.
Right. But in the New Testament, through the blood of Christ, we all have direct access. We are all commanded to offer spiritual sacrifices.
Which means if I just sit in a pew and watch a worship show, I am actually failing in my priestly duty.
You are neglecting your spiritual office, essentially. Hebrews 10:24 commands us to consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together.
The purpose of the meeting is the spurring on.
It's mutual active encouragement, and it's very hard to effectively spur someone on from the back row of a dark auditorium staring at the back of their head.
Wow. Okay, I want to touch on a specific theological term Brum uses in this section. He calls it dispensational distinction.
Yes.
Now, for you listening who might not have a degree in systematic theology, can you break that down for us? Why does that term matter for where we meet on a Sunday?
Sure. It sounds highly technical, but it's actually intensely practical. Yeah. A dispensation basically just refers to a specific way that God manages his relationship with humanity during a specific era of history.
Got it.
Brum argues that we critically need to distinguish between God's program for Israel and God's program for the church.
Okay, so Israel being the physical nation in the Old Testament?
Right. Israel was a literal geopolitical nation. They were promised a specific geographic piece of land.
The Promised Land.
Yes.
Right.
They had a specific central physical sanctuary, first the tabernacle, then the temple in Jerusalem.
Right.
They had a comprehensive civil law that governed their entire society. Their worship was intrinsically tied to a specific physical place.
Because God commanded it. 3 times a year, all your men must appear before the Lord your God at the place he will choose.
Exactly. But the church is fundamentally different. The church is described as a mystery revealed in the New Testament.
How's it different?
It is gathered out from all nations, both Jew and Gentile. It is not bound to any specific plot of land on earth.
We don't have a holy city we have to make a pilgrimage to.
No, we don't. Our holy ground is simply wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in his name.
So when modern Christians try to build a Christian nation or build a massive multi-million-dollar temple in the suburbs, we are essentially acting like we are Old Testament Israel instead of the New Testament church.
We are deeply confused about what time it is theologically speaking.
Right.
We are trying to apply Old Testament physical forms to a New Testament spiritual reality. Broom argues that the church is meant to be a pilgrim people.
A pilgrim people, meaning we were just passing through.
Exactly. We are looking for the city that is to come. Our physical structure should reflect that mobility and that temporary pilgrim nature.
That leads right into the concept of the blessed hope mentioned in Titus chapter 2.
Yes, the imminent return of Jesus Christ.
How does that tie into house churches?
Well, think about it. If we really truly believe that Jesus is coming back soon and that this present world is passing away, Do we really want to sink $20 million into a brick-and-mortar facility that is ultimately going to burn? Or do we want to invest those massive resources into human souls that will actually last forever?
Simplicity sharpens our eschatological focus.
It keeps us incredibly light on our feet, as a pilgrim people should be.
Okay, let's get really practical here as we move into the final section of the essay.
So let's do it.
Because let's say there's someone listening right now who is nodding along.
Mm-hmm.
They see the history, they agree with the theology,
Sure.
but they are terrified of the sheer awkwardness of it all.
It is a valid fear.
Because let's be honest, house church is awkward.
It is very messy.
You're sitting in someone's living room. The host's cat is jumping on the sofa. Someone's toddler is crying in the corner.
Mm-hmm.
You actually have to make small talk with people you barely know.
There is zero polish. There's no production value to hide behind.
Exactly. And Brome addresses this directly in his section on spiritual lessons.
Yes. His first major lesson is presence over performance.
Which sounds lovely on paper, but it's hard in practice. Because we like performance, we like excellence, we want the worship band to be in tune.
We do. We have been deeply conditioned by our culture to sit back and consume excellence.
Right.
But biblical ministry flows from presence, simply being with Jesus and being with one another in the messiness of life.
He references Mark chapter 3.
Where it says Jesus appointed the 12 that they might be with him. That was the primary goal, just being with him.
And in a living room, you cannot perform.
You can't. You can't hide behind a massive light show or a perfectly timed sermon illustration. You just have to be real.
Which leads right to the second practical lesson, shared service under elders. We touched on this earlier, but he really emphasizes the close-up nature of shepherding.
This is vital. Think about a modern megachurch. You might absolutely love the senior pastor's sermons. He might be the most gifted speaker in the world.
Sure.
But does he actually know your name? Does he know that you are secretly struggling with pornography?
No.
Does he know that your teenager is deeply depressed?
There is no way. He has 5,000 people to manage.
It's mathematically impossible for him to know. He is a phenomenal speaker, but he is not a shepherd to you personally.
But in a house church, the shepherd actually smells like the sheep.
Exactly. Galatians 6 speaks of bearing one another's burdens. In the institutional model, that command is often outsourced to a professional counseling program.
Right, you fill out a form and wait for an appointment.
But in the biblical model, it is done by brothers and sisters who know your name, who know your struggles, and who are sitting across the room from you.
It's the difference between a doctor who sees you for 5 rushed minutes in a clinic and a family member who physically takes care of you when you have the flu.
That is a perfect analogy.
Lesson 3 was open yet orderly. We talked about the open mic fears, but Broome actually gives a very practical rhythm for these meetings.
He points to Colossians 3:16. Let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit.
So one person reads a text, one explains it, someone else prays.
It's fundamentally a potluck dinner, not a catered meal.
I absolutely love that analogy. A potluck versus a catered meal.
It changes everything.
Because at a catered meal, if the food is cold or the service is slow, you complain.
Yeah.
You leave a bad review.
Because you paid for a service.
But at a potluck, you're just grateful for whatever your friends brought to share. And honestly, you feel bad if you didn't bring anything yourself.
Exactly. It completely changes your posture from being a religious critic to being an active contributor.
And notice the multiplication aspect he mentions here.
Yes. What happens when the living room gets too full?
You don't launch a building campaign to add an auditorium onto the back of the house.
You multiply. You split.
One house becomes 2.
Yes. This deliberately maintains the intimacy of the group. It actively resists the natural human urge to just build bigger barns.
It's biological growth, like healthy cell division rather than industrial corporate growth.
That is exactly how the early church spread across the globe.
Finally, lesson 4 is courage, seasoned with charity. I really appreciate this point because Brum addresses the deep emotional side of this transition.
He addresses the genuine sense of loss.
Yeah, it is honest to admit that leaving the institutional model feels like a massive loss for many people.
It is a grieving process. You miss the massive choir. You miss the beautiful stained glass windows.
You miss the anonymity, frankly.
Yeah.
Just slipping into the back row unnoticed.
And you miss the polished programs.
That's a huge one, especially for parents. I hear this all the time. If I go to a house church who is going to teach my kids, We won't have the massive children's wing with the slides and the professional curriculum.
And the blunt answer in the house church model is you are,
Right.
you and the other parents in the room. The church truly becomes an extended family raising the kids together.
But Brum encourages us to acknowledge the real blessings of the past.
Yes. He cites Philippians 1, thanking God for our past partnership in the gospel. We don't have to curse the institutional church to leave it.
We just seek what serves Christ best right now,
Yes. And there's that future-proofing element coming back again.
being ready for what's coming.
Exactly. If persecution rises in the West, as we see warned about in 1 Peter, 4 small distributed gatherings will survive.
If the economy crashes, homes will still remain open.
As Brahm beautifully puts it, if resources tighten significantly, homes will keep the Lord's table open even when budgets simply cannot support large facilities anymore.
It is really about being ready for absolutely whatever comes.
Preparedness.
So to summarize the entire argument of the essay for everyone listening, the claim isn't that physical buildings are inherently evil.
No,
It's not that God specifically hates beautiful cathedrals.
not at all. The core claim is that they simply aren't biblically necessary, and in many modern cases, they might actually be getting in the way of what is necessary.
The New Testament repeatedly commands gathering teaching and deep sacrificial love.
But it never once commands building funds or facility maintenance budgets.
So leaving the building is ultimately about recovering the profound strength of being a people, rather than maintaining a place.
It is about treasuring radical obedience over cultural reputation and valuing genuine presence over polished production.
Man, that is a lot to chew on.
It is a paradigm shift.
And I imagine for some of you listening right now, this feels incredibly liberating, like a weight has been lifted.
And for others, it probably feels deeply threatening.
And that is completely okay. We are here to wrestle with the text together. And for those of you who want to dig deeper into this, because honestly, we've really just scratched the surface today, Brother Woody Brahm has a comprehensive cornerstone guide.
It's called Ecclesiology, the Doctrine of the Church.
I would definitely encourage you to check that out if you want to clearly see the deep theological bedrock that all of this is built upon.
It is an excellent and very thorough resource for further study.
Well, as we close out this deep dive today, we want to intentionally return to the exact scripture that started this whole conversation.
The initial snapshot of the church.
Yes, the church in its pure infancy, full of raw life and the power of the Spirit. Acts chapter 2, verses 46 and 47.
Let me read that exact passage for us as we close. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved.
Glad and sincere hearts. That specific phrase really stands out to me today.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
There is such a profound joy that comes from this simple, daily shared life in Christ. It's not an overly complex program, but it is incredibly profound.
And notice the deep encouragement embedded right there at the end of the text. The Lord added to their number.
The Lord did it.
Yes. Our job is simply faithfulness in gathering, loving each other, and breaking bread together. The actual results, the numerical growth, the salvation of souls, that is entirely the Lord's work.
We can truly rest in that. We don't have to exhaust ourselves trying to manufacture growth with better lights or cooler marketing or more polished sermons.
You just have to be stubbornly faithful to the biblical pattern.
I absolutely love that. Well, as you go about your week this week, whether you find yourself sitting in a traditional wooden pew or on a living room sofa, we want to leave you with a simple pastoral blessing.
May your home be a place where bread is broken with gladness, where the word of Christ dwells richly, and where the Lord is powerfully present in your midst. Grace and peace to you.
Grace and peace. Thanks so much for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.